3 years ago, I realized I'd lost something, and I didn't even have a word for what it was. Any gap, any quiet moment, any wait longer than like 30 seconds, my hand was already reaching for my phone before I'd made a conscious decision to reach for it. And afterwards, I didn't feel better. I felt like I'd eaten something that looked like food, like when you finish an entire season of a show on Netflix and you can't even tell someone what it was about. That's when I started asking a question I'd never thought to ask before. What if the discomfort of an empty moment isn't a problem to fix, but information to read? I didn't find the answer in a book or a philosophy class. I found it somewhere I never expected, a disaster zone. In 2011, a foreign correspondent was sitting in a Japanese evacuation center. Earthquake, tsunami, everything gone. And she pulled out her notebook and wrote one line, not about the destruction, not about the scale of it. She wrote, "I keep waiting for someone to snap. Nobody does." Police stations weren't overwhelmed with looting reports. They were overwhelmed with people turning in wallets, jewelry, and cash they'd found in the rubble, voluntarily, to be returned to strangers they'd never meet. When I first read that line, I spent weeks trying to understand what she was actually seeing. And the answer I kept coming back to wasn't discipline, wasn't cultural stoicism, and it definitely wasn't just some romanticized idea about what Japanese people are like. It was something structural, something built, a relationship with objects, with space, with wanting things that most of us have never been taught to examine. Those people knew what they had chosen to hold. So when everything else was gone, they still knew who they were. Most of us have never had to find that out. 3 ideas that might change that, none of them comfortable. The Japanese have a word for what I stumbled into, Danshari. 3 characters, 3 actions. Dan, refuse what's trying to come in. Sha, release what's already there. Ri, detach from the need to hold on at all. Most people hear that and think minimalism. White rooms, 1 chair. That's not what this is. Here's what it actually is, and neuroscience backs this up. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a pile of unopened mail on your counter and an unresolved argument with your boss. Your nervous system reads both of them the same way: unfinished, unsafe. Deal with this. Every object in your space that you're not actively using is a cognitive sticky note, a decision you postponed, and your brain keeps that tab open, quietly, constantly, whether you're aware of it or not. I didn't believe this until I tested it on myself. 3 years ago, I went through everything I owned and asked one question about each item. Did I consciously choose this, or did it just accumulate? For about 60% of what I owned, the honest answer was accumulation, not a decision. Stuff that arrived and never left because leaving required a decision too. The first night after I'd cleared out half my apartment, I slept like I hadn't in months. Not because I'd fixed anything, because I'd stopped deferring things. Fumio Sasaki, a Japanese author whose book Goodbye Things sold over 1 million copies, described the same thing. He expected to feel the space. What surprised him was the quiet inside his head, not silence in the room, silence in his thinking. He hadn't bought a better mattress. He hadn't started meditating. He'd given his nervous system nothing left to process. Here's the question Danshari is actually asking, and I want you to sit with this. Not what should I get rid of, but what am I holding that I never actually chose? Because if you don't know what you've chosen to hold, you also won't know what you have left when something disappears. That's the thread that runs through everything we're going to talk about today. Think about that correspondent, sitting in an evacuation center, surrounded by people who'd lost nearly everything. She kept waiting for someone to snap, for the panic she expected, for the noise. It never came. Because those people had grown up inside a culture that treated silence differently than we do, not as a void to be filled, as something with its own value. The Japanese call it ma. It roughly translates to negative space, but that doesn't really capture it. In Japanese architecture, in music, in conversation, ma isn't absence, it's intentional emptiness. The pause between 2 notes that makes music instead of noise. the bare alcove in a room that becomes the focal point precisely because nothing fills it. Here's how I describe what Ma feels like in a culture that's lost it. If a colleague interrupted your thinking, not constantly, but 10 times an hour, every working hour, across your entire day, would you still call that a good working relationship? Would you keep accepting the meetings? That's what the average smartphone does. 10 interruptions an hour, every hour, most of them unrequested. Most of them designed by people whose entire job is to make sure you never actually stop. I say that as someone who has spent 45 minutes on TikTok looking up how to be more productive. The apps on your home screen, the notifications, the content already queued up the moment you open something, they're filling every possible Ma before you register it's there. And here's what's actually at stake, because this isn't about productivity. When there's no gap between inputs, you don't just get distracted, you lose the ability to know what you actually think. You start outsourcing your inner monologue to whatever you last consumed. And after long enough, the silence starts to feel unbearable. Not because it's empty, but because it's the only place where you show up. That's what I was running from 3 years ago, every time my hand reached for my phone before I'd made a decision to reach for it. The experiment I'd suggest: keep your phone away for the first 30 minutes after you wake up. Not to meditate, not to journal, just to let your brain come online in silence before it starts processing everyone else's noise. That 30 minutes is Ma. It costs you nothing except the discomfort of being present with yourself. And if that discomfort feels familiar, there's a reason it's worth keeping. The most valuable tea bowls in Japan are the broken ones. There's an art form called Kintsugi, the practice of repairing cracked pottery with gold lacquer. Not hidden repairs, deliberate, prominent gold, placed specifically to make the crack the most visible part of the object. The philosophy underneath it is almost confrontational by Western standards. Why would you highlight the flaw? Because the crack is the history. The break is proof the bowl was real, was used, was lived. A bowl with no marks has no story. The damage isn't a defect, it's proof that the bowl actually lived. Wabi-Sabi is the broader worldview this comes from. Beauty not in perfection, but in the evidence of time. The weathered wood, the asymmetrical glaze, the face that's been through something and didn't cover it up. I want to be honest about why this one took me the longest. Danshari and Ma both felt like actions, something to do, a direction to move in. Wabi-Sabi felt, at first, dangerously close to just accepting things I didn't like about myself. The failed version, the detour, the thing I built that didn't work. Calling those things beautiful felt like giving up dressed in philosophy. The distinction that finally clicked was this: Wabi-Sabi doesn't ask you to stop growing. It asks you to stop hiding the process. There's a specific exhaustion that has nothing to do with working too hard. It comes from constantly performing the optimized version of yourself. The photos that look like you figured it out. The responses that don't let anyone see you thinking. The metrics always trending the right direction. While the actual you, the one still figuring things out, never gets a moment to just exist. That exhaustion isn't laziness. It's what happens when you treat who you are right now like a rough draft. The Kintsugi bowl doesn't become valuable despite the crack. It becomes valuable because someone decided the crack was worth keeping, worth making visible, worth filling with gold instead of hiding with glue. What in your life are you filling with glue right now, when it might deserve gold instead? One thing to walk away with, not 3. 1. The 72-hour hold. Next time you feel the pull to buy something, anything that isn't food, medicine, or something you literally ran out of, don't say yes and don't say no. Add it to a list. Set a reminder for 72 hours. Move on. Here's the mechanism, because understanding it changes how it works. Behavioral research consistently shows the emotional peak of a purchase doesn't happen when the package arrives. It happens before you buy, in the anticipation window. Your brain isn't buying the object, It's buying the feeling of about to get something. That feeling has a half-life of roughly 48 to 72 hours. Once you understand that's the actual mechanism, you can use the wait itself as the hit. The anticipation runs its course. The craving settles. The object stays in the store. But here's the flip side that matters more. On the rare occasion you check back 72 hours later and still want it, that's a real want, not a reflex, an actual choice. That's the whole point of Danshari, not deprivation, the difference between accumulation and choosing. The 72-hour hold is just a pause, a small mob between the impulse and the action. In that pause, you get to decide who's actually making the decision. We didn't choose most of what fills our homes, our schedules, our heads. It accumulated while we were reaching for the next thing. And because we didn't choose it, we don't actually know what's ours and what's just noise we've been carrying around. The survivors in those evacuation centers weren't calmer because they owned less. They were calmer because they had spent their lives inside a culture that kept asking one question we mostly forgot to ask. Did I choose this, or did it just accumulate? Their objects, their commitments, their sense of what they needed to be okay. They'd examined it, so when the noise was stripped away, they weren't lost. They knew exactly who they were underneath it. And that's what Danshari, Ma, and Wabi-Sabi are all pointing toward. Not less stuff, not empty rooms, not a performance of simplicity for the internet. When you know what you've chosen to hold, you know what you have left when something disappears. A life where you can actually hear yourself think, where you own your mornings before anyone else gets to them, where who you are right now is allowed to show up without apology. You don't need to overhaul anything this weekend, but the next time you feel that restless itch, that vague pull towards something you can't quite name, try sitting with it before you reach for your wallet or your phone. Ask, what is this actually about? The answer is almost always more interesting than whatever you were about to do instead. One question for the comments. I read all of these. What in your life right now are you filling with glue when it might deserve gold instead? See you next week.